What's up, everyone? It's Adonis back with another episode of the Tallanasty podcast. On today's episode, I'm about to get a little personal, talking about my childhood and some things going on within my family right now. So enjoy the episode. This is the Tallanasty podcast.
It is Friday, so we are gonna go to the fucking club. Saturday, we're going to the fucking club. Sunday, fun day, go to the fucking club. Monday is Labor Day, so we're gonna go to the fucking club. Black Tech Tuesday, go to the fucking club. White Trash Wednesday, go to the fucking club. 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 Club.
You should always love your family members.
Why do you think that?
Well, at the end of the day, they're your family, so there's nothing they should do to make you not want to ever talk to them again.
People have very narcissistic family members they shouldn't be dealing with.
But we should try to forgive family and work out issues. They're all we
I
have.
understand that we should try to forgive family and speak to them, but if a
Ken?
family member screws you over time and time again, they're obviously not a good person.
Even if your family's not a good person, it's our job to help them. Accept them as they are and help them learn.
Because someone's your family member doesn't mean you have to accept them as a piece of trash. If they don't want to do right by you, don't let them into your life.
But that's a bad way of thinking because you're just leaving them behind. So you're saying just because you have a disagreement, you would cut off a family member forever?
Disagreements and arguments are one thing, but being repeatedly screwed over every time you forgive them is telling them that no matter what they do, they'll have a room in your life.
But they should have a room in your life. They're your family. Isn't that the right thing to
No,
do?
because you're like inadvertently training them to treat you poorly because they know you're not going to do anything about
Believe
it.
me, nobody would maliciously try to hurt you. It's never happened to me and my family, so it can't possibly happen to anybody
Those
else.
people that say things like this come from a very loving family and don't have the type of family members I'm describing right now.
It's true, my family's always helped each other out and said sorry. Everybody should have my mindset regardless of their past
I just
life.
think we should be considerate of everybody's situation and understand not everybody comes from a place of love like you.
Bro, me and my mom get into it all the time. Last week, she wanted to wash my clothes. I was like, Mom, I can do it myself.
That's the worst thing you can say, then you're in a very good position.
I'm saying if I can forgive my mom for wanting to wash my clothes, you should be able to forgive
People don't have to
yours.
stay in contact with their family.
Look, even though I come from a place of love, I'm still going to criticize and condemn anybody that did it. I just think that...
That was from a TikTok video uploaded by Advice from Lewis Reloaded. He's a funny guy, and I'm showing this video not only because it's funny, but because I also relate to it a lot. My family has caused me one issue after another. They just can't seem to mind their own business. And I really do feel like a lot of the hardships caused in my life has been because of their actions. But to fully understand my side of the story, I gotta go back to when I was born. I was born in the early 2000s, obviously. My birth mother passed away while she was giving birth to me. It's still unclear what exactly was the cause of death. My father was and still is essentially a dickhead. Before I came along, he was a party goer and a rager. Kind of like me, but on a much more extreme level. He was always high on drugs and speeding and in and out of jail. At some point, he met my mom, and she wanted a kid, and she asked him to be the father. And my father agreed to do it, completely oblivious to what goes into raising a child. So he impregnated her. 9 months later, she died. I don't remember anything of my mother, obviously, because, I was a baby. But it seems that shortly after her death, there was a lot of family drama, more specifically between my grandmother, so my mother's mom, and my father. I don't know all the details, but essentially my father cut her off from my life when I was 4 years old. I was about 4 years old, and my grandmother was babysitting me. I was at the dinner table with my grandmother and my 2 aunts. All of us were imitating each other's burps. Apparently, I went home and did the same thing to my parents, and they didn't like it. So about a couple weeks later, my father called my grandmother late at night complaining about it, and my grandmother got upset because she's like, it's 10 o'clock at night, I need to get up for work in the morning, and you're over here calling me about something petty that happened 2 weeks ago. And she hung up the phone, went back to bed, didn't think much of it. Next thing you know, she never saw me again until I was 20 years old. I still spoke to her on the phone from time to time, although our conversations were limited. My aunts I was still in contact with, but it was always supervised, even if I probably saw them. Like, as I got older, I probably started seeing them maybe about once a year. And it was always supervised visits. And as a kid, I didn't know what's going on. Matter of fact, my father led me to believe that my grandmother didn't want anything to do with me. Because, as time went on, it was like, hey, how come I haven't seen grandma in a while? And then eventually it was like, hey, wait a minute, like, I haven't seen her in years. Like, how busy can this woman possibly be that she can't make time to see her own grandson for years later? And I mentioned it to my dad one day, and I'm like, hey, like, why doesn't grandma ever want to see me? He would not tell me the details of the story. And part of the reason why her side of the story is more believable is because my father refuses to share any details while she's very open about it. But he pretty much told me that they got into an argument. He would not tell me what it was about. And he basically said that he was rude to his girlfriend at the time, who still is. We'll get into that in a second. And he didn't like that. And he was like, hey, if you're not going to respect me and my son and my rules, then I can't let you watch him. Pretty much his side of the story was that my grandmother went off on her own and never contacted him again. That is not the case at all. Some of my families have tried to put it in my head that, my grandmother might be making stuff up just to protect her innocence. But let me tell you something, I know my dad pretty well. I know how he is. I know that a lot of people don't like him because of the way he is. Aside from him refusing to tell me, like, anything in detail, when my grandmother would tell me stories and tell me, like, oh yeah, your father did this, that, and the other, and I always said right back to her, I said, yep, that sounds exactly like something my dad would do. So let's rewind back in time. When I was about 3 years old, my father's girlfriend moved in with us. I always called her my mother because, I didn't remember my birth mother, and she raised me like a mother. I essentially had 3 sets of grandparents because, I still call my birth mother's mom and her father and that side of the family, I still call them grandma and grandpa. I still call my father's mother grandmother. And I call my stepmother's parents grandma and grandpa. My father's dad died when I was really young as well. I think I was a toddler. He died shortly after brain surgery. He was a great guy. I live by many of his rules to this day, and probably his most famous quote, he always said, always arrive early when you have an appointment or you need to go to work or whatever it is you're doing, because he always said, early is on time is late, and late is just pure disrespect. And that might not have been his exact words, but it was very similar to that. Obviously, if you're going to a college party, if you tell people to be there at 5, they're going to show up at 8, 9 o'clock because people here don't have any decency or moral standards. But I do use that when, say, I go to work in the morning. If I'm scheduled to come in at 12 p.m., I'll show up at 11:30 and hang out in the break room until it's time for me to clock in. Sometimes I'll even show up at 11 o'clock. If I'm not doing anything before then, I'll even show up at 10:30. I'll go grab lunch, eat in the break room. And because, you know what, I'd rather be bored in the break room with nothing to do than rushing out the door. Next thing you know, say I'm supposed to be there at 12, I show up at 1, and, you know, you might get away with it the first couple of times, but if that becomes an ongoing thing, you become known as the guy that they can't rely on. My father pretends that he also follows his father's, philosophy, but he 100% does not. One of the last conversations I had with my father, I told him, I said, you know, if my grandfather was still alive, he would be so disappointed in the man that my father is today. And in all honesty, my father will never be even half the man my grandfather was. Not even close to it. So let's try to stay on track. So yeah, I grew up without knowing my grandmother, with barely knowing my 2 aunts, because like I said, I spoke to them from time to time, but my parents did not like them. And growing up, my parents were very strict. They didn't want me to go to public school, so they homeschooled me, which I didn't think much of it then. Now, looking back, you know, I'm not saying that I'm against homeschooling. I'm just saying that I shouldn't have been homeschooled by my own parents, because my parents are not the best people in general. And when I say parents, I am, of course, referring to my dad and technically my stepmom. My stepmom is a bit of a bitch. They might think now that because I'm an adult, I don't remember any of this stuff, or I remember it incorrectly, but I remember as a kid, she used to be really mean to me sometimes, and she specifically did it when no one else was in the room. And if I ever told her parents or anyone else about it, she would tell them that I was making it up, and then she would pull me to the side, and she would punish me for telling our family's business. But when I tell you, my stepmom seemed to get a burst of joy out of punishing me. I remember one time when she went out of town for a few days, and it was just me and my dad. And my father is a video editor. He works from home. And he spent all day in the office, and he did not feed me. And I remember going into the office a few times. I'm like, hey, Dad, I'm hungry. And he'd be like, yeah, give me a second. Like, I'm working. He's like, don't interrupt me when I'm working. Hours would go by. He was still in his office. So I stuck it to the kitchen, grabbed a jar of peanut butter, and just started eating peanut butter out of the jar. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. And when my father finally came out of his office and saw me with peanut butter in my mouth, he got mad at me, accused me of stealing his food, since, he was the one who paid for it. And when my mom got home, they punished me for, I believe I was grounded for about 3 months. And it wasn't the last time that I, quote unquote, stole food from the cupboard, because there would be other times where my mom would be out of town, or she would be out for the day or whatever. My dad got caught up in work, and he didn't feed me. Now, back then, they would guilt trip me, and they would give me lectures on why stealing from people is not right, which, obviously that is a good life lesson. But now that I'm an adult looking back on that, and I just think to myself, like, I was a kid. Like, if anything, they should be blaming themselves, because if I was well fed, chances are I wouldn't be sneaking around the kitchen looking for food. Now, I understand that there's probably some kids out there who might look for junk food. Like, they might sneak into the kitchen and try and steal a cookie, or maybe a candy cane. But whose kid goes into the kitchen and starts stuffing his mouth from the peanut butter jar? Additionally, even if it's something else, like, say, a cookie or a cracker, is that really worth grounding your kid for 3 months for? And nobody knew about it because, obviously when you were a kid, you're too embarrassed to say anything about it. So my friends didn't know. They just thought I disappeared for 3 months. They always say that strict parents often create children who don't want to talk to their parents, who lie to their parents to get away with stuff, ultimately shut their parents out and don't want to tell them anything. And that was exactly who I was as a kid. At some point, my parents decided to go on a road trip. One of the worst experiences of my life. We first went all the way around Florida. We went from Fort Lauderdale to Gainesville, and then eventually we went from Gainesville all the way to Kansas because that's where my mom's sister was living. And they enjoyed it, sure, but I hated it, and I'll tell you why I hated it is because, I liked having a routine. I liked, once I did my homework for the day, I would go outside and play with my friends, or I wasn't allowed to watch TV, but I would spend hours watching TV anytime someone else watched me. And that goes to what I was saying earlier, that overprotected kids turn into rebels and lie to their parents and do things behind their back. Anytime I went to any of the grandparents' houses, I would be on the TV. I'd be eating food I wasn't supposed to, because this is another thing. My parents forced me to be vegan just because they were vegan. God forbid I took my parents with me anywhere. I remember one time we went to my friend's birthday party. And my mom told me, she's like, hey, when they brought the cake, my mom said, hey, you can't have any of the cake because it contains milk and eggs and that's not vegan. And she made me stand up at the dinner table and tell everybody there that I wasn't going to eat the cake because it contained animal products and I was choosing to go vegan because I cared about the animals. Bullshit. I mean, yeah, I care about animals. All kids do. But do you really think that as a kid you really want to turn down a cake, let alone tell the entire table of kids that, hey, I'm not going to eat any cake today, and then you get laughed at because who the fuck doesn't want to eat any birthday cake? So whenever I was at my grandparents' house, I would eat cake, cheese, cookies, anything and everything that I wasn't allowed to have at my house. And I would watch all my favorite shows and movies. And then when my parents asked me, they would be like, hey, what did you do today? I would make stuff up like, oh, I colored all day. Oh, I read a book. Oh, we went to the park. And yeah, there were days where I did other things other than watch TV and eat junk food all day. But my point is, there were a lot of times where I did things that they didn't want me to do, and I just didn't say anything. And I don't think the people watching me did either, because they knew how strict my parents were. They wanted to see me happy. On the road trip, we would stay at a hotel sometimes we probably stayed about a week at each place. There was one hotel we stayed at for 2 weeks, and then in Gainesville we were there for probably about a month or more. And I remember, this is what I absolutely hated about the road trip, is that we would go somewhere, whether it was an Airbnb or hotel or whatever. It was like I would meet new people. I would start to see them on a regular basis, and I would make friends. And as soon as it was like, hey, I have my own circle of friends and we hang out and we do whatever, then it was time to pack up our bags and leave again. I wasn't allowed to have much of anything. I had maybe about 2 toys on that road trip because my parents were packing everything into their tiny little car. It was a Honda Civic. And later on another road trip, they got a big cargo top on it to store mostly my mom's stuff. That's another thing. My mom used to yell at me as a kid for having too much stuff. But then she's bringing home all kinds of clothes and whatnot. And my mom used to get mad at me for outgrowing my shoes. She would buy me new shoes. And, I would go outside and play, as all kids do. Let's say I messed up my shoes. I scraped off the bottom of my shoes because I was on my scooter and I was playing roughly outside or whatever. And she would get mad at me anytime my shoes got damaged. She would get mad at me anytime I outgrew my shoes, because then she had to go spend money to buy me new shoes or new clothes. And she was always talking about how it was unfair that she always had to spend money on me and that I needed to do my part. Whenever I got gifts or money from the family for my birthday or for Christmas, my parents would always take it. They would sell a majority of the toys I got. They would take a majority of the money I got. Let's say I got $100 for my birthday. They would take all of it and they'd give me probably about $5 from that 100. And they would tell me that they were taking the other 95 because I needed to do my part and help pay the bills in the house. Like, I'm sorry, but it's your responsibility as a parent to be willing to spend that money and make those sacrifices when you have a kid, I didn't ask to be born. I asked to be put on this planet. Matter of fact, I shouldn't exist. I shouldn't be alive right now, because guess what? If my bum of a father didn't impregnate my mother, she would probably still be alive to this day. But my father, his immature ass, thought that the guy who's getting speeding tickets every other week could raise a fucking kid. And now, as an adult, I can completely understand why my grandmother doesn't like him. She didn't like him when he was dating my birth mom. And I completely understand why. He's a fucking loser. You know, I mentioned earlier that they work from home. Well, at least my dad does. My mom pretends to help out with his business, but she really just criticizes him and makes him feel bad. And then while my neighbors are getting up at 5 in the morning to go to work and not coming home until 6, 7 o'clock at night, she cleans the house here and there, takes a nap for 3 hours, then cleans the house again, and then is in bed by 7, 8 o'clock because she works too much and nobody helps her out. So back to the road trip. At some point, we ended up in Kansas, where my mom's sister lived, and we stayed there for quite a few months. And I've never been a fan of Kansas because, you know, it's Kansas. There's not a lot to do there. It's just a bunch of cornfields. There's no, like, playground or supermarket nearby, but I made the best out of what I could. And at some point, my parents actually considered moving there because my aunt had a baby, and my mom was excited to be an aunt, and she wanted to live there. They actually signed a lease and paid an application fee. And just, you know, I was starting to make friends. Once again, I was starting to make friends, and I was certain this is where we were going to live. Then all of a sudden, they decide, you know what, it's too cold here. We're going to break our lease, lose the $200 application fee or however much it was, and we're going to go back to Florida. Next thing I know, we're living in Jacksonville, which is where I say I'm from because that's where I grew up. I spent my teenage years and high school years in Jacksonville, Florida, and I had my own crew of boys there. We used to all hang out. I used to get along with everyone in the neighborhood. But around this time is like where I started to grow up more, and I wanted to be out more on my own. And my parents didn't want that for me. They were very controlling. And as nice as I was to everyone in my neighborhood, I became really rebellious when I was in my teenage years. My parents to this day don't know this, but I would sneak out of the house at night, and I would go to the clubs in downtown Jacksonville. Not even my friends knew this, because I was always worried that if I said something to the wrong person, you know, they might say something to my parents, and I didn't want that to happen. I didn't go to the bars, though, too often, because, you know, like I said, I had a pretty close friend group in the neighborhood, so I would spend a lot of nights hanging out with them instead. When we moved to Tallahassee and when I turned 18 and I was old enough to get into places like Potbelly's and Recess without having to sneak in, I would go all the time. One thing I remember growing up is my parents were always complaining about, like, how broke they were, because my father, he's a video editor, and he runs his own online store where he sells animation templates. It's like these templates that companies can use for TV commercials, YouTube videos, whatever it is. It's got customizable text, whatever. And while I admire the business idea, I just don't see it being successful to pay off $1,200 in rent every month. And to be honest, my father's not that hard of a worker. You know, he would always work on his laptop in his bed. Most days he didn't even get dressed. He would just be in bed all day in a hoodie and his pajama pants, spending some time working, and, you know, large majority of his day pirating movies on his laptop instead of working. And then he would go in the bathroom for hours and hours on end. You know, he would be in the bathroom for 2 hours, and then he would walk out. 2 minutes later, he'd walk right back in. I remember this used to piss me off as a kid, because before we lived in Jacksonville, we only had one bathroom. And there would be times where I really had to use the bathroom. I would be waiting outside the bathroom, waiting for my father to finish up, and he wouldn't come out. And I was wondering, like, what is he doing in there? Now that I'm older, I'm gonna be honest, I think my father spent a majority of his day jacking off in the bathroom. That's the only thing I can think of. Because taking a shit doesn't even take that long. And in my teens, I would spend a lot of time out of the house. I developed a strong work ethic. I was a dog walker / pet sitter in my neighborhood because my parents didn't want me to get a job at Chick-fil-A or anywhere else. So I made my own money dog walking and pet sitting for the neighbors. I was actually really popular amongst them and made quite a bit of money doing that. And I loved it, not only because it paid well, but because, you know, I'm naturally fond of animals, especially dogs and cats. And I wasn't allowed to have pets of my own, so it was nice to be able to, you know, play with these animals and also get paid for it. And I got along with every neighbor of all ages. The only people I didn't really get along with were the little kids, because even to this day, little kids annoy the fuck out of me. But even then, as long as the kids weren't, like, necessarily bothering me, like if they were just off playing with their toys and they weren't screaming and crying next to my ear, I'd be talking to the parents, having a good time. It didn't matter if they were 16, 18, 20, 55. I always found something to talk about with people because I was always just a very social person. And it became like this daily routine that around the afternoon I would go out, I would walk people's dogs, and then probably after 5, 6 o'clock, I would go hang out with my boy squad, and we would hang out for hours on end, and I wouldn't come home until it was time for me to go to bed. And a lot of people don't know this, but part of the reason why I did that was because I was trying to stay away from my parents, because they were being a fucking pain in my ass all the time. They used to spy on me when I was a teenager, you know, because, like, I technically wasn't allowed out of the neighborhood, but I would still sneak out of the neighborhood with my friends on a regular basis. But there would be times where I'd be with my friends in the neighborhood, and we would see my parents standing behind a tree or something, just staring at us. Or, you know, I'd be like, hey, I'm going to this person's house because they're having a party. Next thing I know, my parents are walking down that street. I would tell them, like, hey, I'm going to go with my friend to Walmart. Next thing I know, they show up at Walmart. I'd be like, what are you guys doing here? And they would say, oh, wow, what a coincidence. Like, we're at the same place at the same time. I'm like, bullshit, this isn't a coincidence. You guys knew I was coming here and you're here to spy on me. And they would try and play it off. And then when I got home, my father would tell me that it was his right to check up on me because I was his son and I was still a minor. Another activity I liked to do a lot was go swimming. I would go to the pool because it was a really good big pool, and we had ping pong and cornhole right next to it as well. So me and my friends would go there, and that's where I would talk to a lot of girls. And a lot of times they were in college, but a lot of times these were girls my own age. And if my parents showed up, sometimes my father would show up by himself. He would start staring at the girl that I was with and making her uncomfortable. And then whenever she left or whenever I left, basically whenever him and I were alone, he would say to me, oh, she's really pretty. And I would say back, I'm like, Dad, she's 16 years old. Like, you can't be saying that. And his response was always, no, it's fine for me to say it because all I'm doing is giving her a compliment. He would say that having sex with her would be what would be illegal, but calling her pretty or telling her she looks nice isn't necessarily a bad thing, because we live in America, and in America we have the freedom of speech. So yeah, basically my dad was a pedophile. He would even come up to us sometimes and compliment her looks. He would tell her she had a nice outfit as she was sitting there in her bikini, or he would tell her that she had nice eyes. And the other thing too that I'd mention, I would be like, Dad, like, you have a girlfriend. And this wasn't the first time. Like, we'd be walking around the town center and he'd be flirting with all the college girls. And my father would always be like, oh, well, you know, your mom doesn't mind that I talk to other girls, you know, because at the end of the day, she was the one that was always home with him. At the same time, though, I'm still skeptical about that one because she was never there when my father would flirt with these girls. She certainly wasn't there when he would flirt with teenagers. And she never confirmed this. And a couple years later, I was about 18 years old. I remember this one incident where there was a girl that I was hanging out with. Her and I were hanging out for probably a good 6 months or more before, you know, my relationships have never been known to last with women. But one time she came up to me and she was like, "Hey, your dad's a fucking creep." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she shows me her phone and she's like, "Last night he went on my Facebook profile. Pretty much my father was stalking her entire Facebook picture and he was liking all of her posts, is specifically the ones where she was in a bikini or in a revealing outfit." She was 21 at the time. I was 18. He was liking posts from her back from she was 16, 15 years old. So he spent a great deal of time stalking her profile. And that wasn't the only girl he did that to. I had other girls also complaining about my dad stalking their social medias. And it got to the point where, you know, I did not want to introduce my parents to any girl I ever hung out with. You know, it got to the point where if I was at the pool with a girl and I saw my parents walk in, I'd be like, "Hey, you want to go hang out with my friends down the street? Like, we need to get out of here. Like, how do I get this girl out of here without making it obvious to her? It might be obvious to my parents. I didn't give a fuck. But it was like, she cannot know that those are my parents because my dad is going to be a fucking weirdo towards her." He did this until I blocked him on Instagram because he used to follow me on Instagram. I blocked him on Instagram because he would look up my followers and then he would look up all the girls and he'd be like, "Who's this? Who's this? Who's that?" He didn't ask about any of my male friends. It was only the girls. And then he would start liking their pictures. So I blocked him on Instagram. I still had him on Facebook, but I had my friends list hidden. So if you go to my Facebook today, you'll only be able to see the mutual friends or none at all. I turned the privacy setting for my friends list on because my father would go through my friends list and he'd be like, "Who's this? Who's this? Who's that?" And stalk all the girls. They also would judge a lot of my friends. They would be like, "Hey, I see this person in his profile picture. He's wearing a black shirt. You need to stop hanging out with him because of that, because black is an evil color." "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, you notice how evil people like Darth Vader are always wearing black? That's because black is a negative color and you should eliminate it from your life." They're like, you can't be wearing black. You can't be posting about it. You need to unfriend this person. I'd be like, "What, are you fucking insane? So because Dr. Eggman wears the color red and he's evil, does that mean red is an evil color too?" Like, I can guarantee you, name any color in the book, I can guarantee you, I will bet my life, that I can find a supervillain who has worn that color. Additionally, since when did we start basing real life off of cartoons and movies? What the fuck? And as I got older, about 16, 17 years old, I started to really think that my parents were fucking crazy. And I never said anything to anybody. Because for starters, people say don't talk ill about your parents. People say at this age, between the ages of 16 and like 25, is when you hate your parents. And you think they're crazy. You don't want to be seen in public with them. People would tell me, "It's just a phase. You'll get over it. You'll see that they're doing this for your own good." But I think there's a difference between, being protective of your child and, doing things in his or her favor. But then there's also the parent who's just a complete psychopath and uses their kid as an emotional support dog and doesn't give a shit about her child's life. Like, they didn't give a shit about me when they decided, yeah, we're gonna go on a year road trip from South Florida all the way to Kansas. They didn't give a shit about me when we moved out of Jacksonville. I was 17 years old. I'll always love Jacksonville because of the experience I had growing up with my friends, not my parents. when I was 17 years old, we moved to Tallahassee. And Tallahassee had nothing to do. When I was 18 years old, I could finally get into places like Potts and Recess. And let me tell you something, I was at Recess 3 times a week. I was at the clubs every single day. And some people who know me on a more personal level, they say that the reason I did that was because my parents kept me so enclosed that when I finally became legal and could do things my own way, I just went crazy about it. But yeah, fast forward to Tallahassee, I was 17 years old, about to turn 18, still living with my parents, and I wanted to move out as soon as I turned 18 years old. I couldn't do that because, all the money that I had saved up from dog walking, they took all of that to pay for the apartment we were in Tallahassee. We used to live off of Appalachia Parkway. All the money that I spent years saving up for so that I could use it to live my own life and dreams once I turned 18 and I was officially on my own. Gone. They took all of it. I got a job at Jimmy John's where I stayed there for a solid 2 to 3 years. They would take my money from that paycheck too. They said, well, now you're an adult, you need to start paying your rent. They essentially gave me the option of paying over a third of the rent and living with them, or I was going to live on the street. So obviously, I decided to live with my parents because who wants to go homeless? And they told me that the rent was $1,200 a month. Originally, I was paying them $800 a month, but then they raised it to $900. And I went to the club every single day, and let me tell you why. Because it was just like in Jacksonville where I was with my friends all day. I enjoyed the club as well. I loved it. But it was also an excuse to get the fuck away from my parents. And every day, I would go to work. I would work there all day long. And then as soon as I get off work, I would come home, drop off my stuff, get in an Uber, go to College Town. I was hardly ever in the house, and I wasn't home until about 2, 3 in the morning. It got to the point where I barely even saw my parents because they were impossible to deal with. And I would always ask my boss for more hours. I would always pick up the shift. I was that coworker where you could call me at 7 in the morning and be like, hey, so-and-so just called out. Can you be here in 20 minutes? And I would be there. Because number one, I wanted to save up money to move out on my own. But I also wanted extra money so that I could go out and party. And it was like a repeat cycle. I was always, going to work, getting a paycheck every week. Almost all of it was going to my parents. And whatever I had left over, I would blow it all at the club. And, there would be times where I wouldn't go out for a while because I'm like, you know what? I need to save money. And then my parents would drive me crazy, and it would be like, I cannot fucking live like this. Like, I need to be out. I need to be out with my friends. I need to see people. I need to do something else other than sit at home and listen to my parents ramble and complain about everything under the sun. Literally all day long. That's all they did. It was always like, hey, we hate the movies you watch. We hate the music you listen to. We hate your choice of friends, even though they didn't know any of my friends at this point because I didn't want anyone to meet my parents or know that they even existed. We hate the job you chose. It was like, we love you, son, but we hate everything about you and in every single aspect imaginable. Like, that's how I felt. And they don't listen. Like, they always said, like, whatever you need, we're here for you. Come and talk to us. We'll always listen. They never fucking listened to me. They never gave a shit about anyone other than themselves. They never supported me financially, emotionally, morally. Just last Christmas, my father gave me back $500 because he said it was unfair to make you pay for the hotels on the road trip. And so he said, here's $500 back. And I took it, and I used it. But it's like, he thinks that makes up for all the years. It was a lot more than $500 that they took from me. Like, $500 does not make up for probably the thousands of dollars between the hotels that we stayed at because when we moved out of Jacksonville, we went on another road trip until we got to Tallahassee. And they made me pay a portion of every hotel we stayed at, even though I wasn't the one deciding where we stayed at. And I had no control over where we went. And then every month I was giving them $900 to live with them in Tallahassee. So it was well over $500 that I gave them. That they forced me to give them over the years. So a little $500 over Christmas. That's like if I borrow $10 from you, and instead of giving you back the $10 years later, I give you back 2 pennies. That's essentially what it feels like. When I was 19 years old, a hurricane struck Tallahassee, and it knocked down a tree behind our house that crushed the roof. My neighbors next door had to evacuate because their apartment got destroyed. My apartment, although the damage wasn't as bad, it was still bad enough that, they needed to do something about it. And my parents pulled me aside one day and they said, like, hey, you need to move out because we all need to leave. And they're like, you're a grown man, you're not coming with us. They said they gave me about a week to pack my stuff, throw out my stuff, and leave. And I said, well, where am I going to go? And they said, well, that's for you to figure out. Now, obviously, I didn't have money for a hotel. I didn't have money for an Airbnb. You can't sign a lease in just a week. It takes time to get approved by these apartments. And I had already been trying to get into apartments like State House and even Southgate. And they wouldn't take me in for multiple reasons. A lot of these were strictly student living and I wasn't in school. So they didn't want to take me in unless I showed proof that I was in school. A lot of places I couldn't afford the rent from what my parents were taking from me. A lot of them required me to sign on for a guarantor. And my parents refused to be my guarantor. And they also lied to me and told me that my other family members, such as my grandmother, didn't want to do it either. So I didn't even bother asking anybody else because I always thought that my parents were telling the truth. But years later, I mentioned it to my grandmother and she said, oh, if I knew back then you needed a guarantor, I would have done it absolutely. My parents were fucking liars. As strict as they are, they were so strict on me about lying that they would ground me for 3 months for stealing peanut butter and then lying about it. But then they were lying to me my whole life about my birth mother's mom, about my other grandmother, about everything. So I was pretty sure I was going to go homeless when that hurricane hit. Then my cousin, who lived in Jacksonville at the time, contacted me and she's like, hey, I heard what happened. If you want, you can stay with me until, you're back on your feet. So I did. I went to live with her for a few months. I started this podcast while I was staying with her in Jacksonville, actually. And I was working 2 jobs, one at a grocery store, one at a warehouse. The warehouse job, I would be there sometimes as early as 1 in the morning, and we wouldn't leave until 9 a.m. unloading boxes at FedEx. One of the hardest jobs I've ever had, and FedEx does not give a shit about their employees. I'll get into that in a second. I was also at a grocery store. So, say I got off of FedEx at 9, I would then go to the grocery store and work there. I would sometimes close. I would be working from 2 p.m. till 11 p.m. I would go home, get an hour or 2 of sleep, wake up the next day, go back to the warehouse. And I didn't have a car either, so I would bike to the warehouse. It was probably about an hour bike ride from my cousin's house to the warehouse. And after the holiday season, a lot of times my shifts at the warehouse were shortened to 4 hours. Instead of, I would say go in at, say, 3 or 4 in the morning, and we'd be out by 9 or 10 a.m. It was better, but it's still difficult to wake up at 1, 2 in the morning and get ready for work. I thought it was going to be easy because I'm a night owl. I'm like, yeah, I got this. Like, back at home, I used to be at the clubs from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m., go home, go to bed, and then I'd be at work at 6 in the morning. Like, yeah, I can handle a warehouse job. Let me tell you something. Dancing and jumping around for 4 hours at a club is different than throwing 150-pound boxes around for 4 hours. But before that warehouse job, I didn't think I was capable of being tired. But working at FedEx, it's like all I ever wanted to do was sleep. That's all I ever thought about. That's all I wanted to do. I was downing energy drinks like crazy because that was the only way I could physically stay awake. And I had to consume a lot of energy drinks because energy drinks don't work on me. I can literally drink a can of Monster right now, and it will not affect me whatsoever. I'll be wide awake for the next 2 hours. If I'm already sleepy and I drink a can of Monster or Red Bull, whatever, I'll still be sleepy. It does not affect me. Unless I drink 2 or 3 cans of it, then it affects me. After the new year being 2024, the year that we're in right now, my cousin's brother reached out to me, and he's an electrician. He works out of state, and he earns a great deal of money doing it. He asked me if I wanted to work with him to earn some more money, and ideally I didn't want to do it because that cousin in particular, I saw he was a bit of a wreck, like my father. He was in and out of jail, and he got in trouble for doing drugs and some other stuff, so I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. But at this one, I was desperate. I'm like, listen, I'm working like crazy, still not earning enough money. I want to get out of here. I want to get back to Tallahassee, because even though I was back in my hometown, I miss Tallahassee like hell, and I was like, I need to get back. And over Christmas, the complex that I'm in now, I'm not going to say their name because I don't want the entire city to know where I live. But they contacted me, and they asked me, they said, hey, would you like to sign with us for fall 2024? And I said, let me think about it, I'll get back to you guys. So I called my cousin, and I said, you know what, let's do it. I signed my lease here at the apartment that I'm in right now. The apartment that I'm in right now, recording this podcast, I signed that lease back in December of 2023. And I didn't tell my parents about that because I didn't want them to stop me. So, I also didn't tell them about me going to work with my cousin up in Arkansas because I didn't want them to try and stop that either. They called me. They did find out, though, through another family member, and they called me and tried to start a rumor. They told me that my cousin's dad used to physically abuse his wife. And I asked my cousin about that and confirmed that it in fact was not true, that my parents made that up to try and change my mind about going to work with my cousin out of state. So I still went with my cousin to work out of state, and I knew that he had some issues, but I didn't realize that he was literally a fucking psychopath. He had issues with anyone and everyone off the street. He had plenty of issues with me because he wanted to control my whole personality. He reminds me of my dad because of the way he was so controlling. Once when we were going down the highway, I was watching movies on my phone, and he kept telling me, he's like, hey, don't hold the phone too close to your face, and I ignored him. This man pulled over the car, snatched my phone, and he attempted to throw it out the window onto the highway. And I was like, dude, what the fuck? And he's like, oh, what are you gonna do about it? He's like, we're miles away from Florida. You ain't got no family here, no friends. He's like, there's no one here. No one here is gonna save you. I can do whatever I want to you. And that's when I knew. I was like, oh, this was a bad idea. And I knew that I needed to get the fuck out of there. And that was the first family member that I've cut off this year. We were living in Arkansas. So we were living in a tiny little house a few miles from the job site. One day I said, hey, I'm gonna go take a shower. I'll be right back. And someone called me, so I'm talking on the phone. 20 minutes later, I'm like, all right, man, I gotta go. I gotta get in the shower. I'm about to get in the shower. My cousin's all up in my face, and he's like, you're a fucking liar. You aren't a man of your word, this and the other. I'm like, what the fuck, dude? And he's like, you said you were going to take a shower 20 minutes ago. Why haven't you done that now? He said, you're a piece of shit and you don't keep your word. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that when I take my shower, it's any of your goddamn business. Like, I take my shower when I want to. And he's like, it's not about that. It's about the fact that you didn't keep your word. I'm like, I'm about to take my shower right now. I didn't say when I was going to take my shower. Like, dude, I was on the phone. Chill out. And I just burst out at him because this was not the first time. Let me tell you something. That same day, we had gone to Walmart. When I grabbed my shopping cart, some old lady rudely snatched it from me and took it for herself. I was pissed for a minute, but I didn't do anything about it because I didn't think it was a big deal. My cousin told me that I should have fought that lady and stood up for myself. And I told them, like, dude, like, you got to pick and choose your battles. Like, yes, what she did was wrong, but there are a bunch of other shopping carts right here in front of us. Let's just grab another one and keep going on about our lives and not cause a scene. Because let me tell you something else. So they see a 20-year-old trying to start a fight with an 80-year-old woman. Who do you think the store is going to side with? The 80-year-old woman or the 20-year-old man? And even if they do believe my story, they're going to look at me like I'm the crazy one, and they're going to say to me that I'm crazy for wanting to start such a big fight and cause such a big scene over something so small. Then as we were leaving Walmart, some lady was driving her truck around. She probably didn't even know that we existed. My cousin points her out and he goes, look at that fucking cunt. Look at the way she's looking at us. I don't like it. And I'm like, dude, you're literally causing your own problems here. Like, it's literally all in your head. But back to the bathroom, he got up in my face. And he was like, yeah, you're a piece of shit. You don't keep your word. And I shoved him out of the bathroom, slammed the door in his face, took a shower, came out, and I started to pack my stuff because I was getting ready to leave. And I didn't tell him. But then this guy starts throwing threats at me, saying that he's going to beat me up. I ended up quitting my job at the electric company because I couldn't work with my cousin anymore. And then one day when he was at work, he called me and he said, hey, I'm on my way home to beat you up right now. I grabbed a table, blocked off the front door, and then I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find. Went to my room, called the police, told them everything. And they asked me, they said, do you have any hardcore evidence of him doing anything illegal to you specifically? And I said, no. And they said, well, then we can't do anything because he hasn't done anything illegal yet. While he did threaten me, I didn't have proof that he said that he was gonna beat me up. And they also said that since both our names were on the lease of that house, legally, I could not lock him out of his own house. I unblocked the door. I instead went into my room, blocked that door, and trapped myself in that bedroom for 3 days trying to figure out what I was gonna do. I was peeing in Gatorade bottles, avoiding him at all costs. I had the knife right by my nightstand because I didn't know if this man was gonna knock down the door one day and attack me in my sleep. And I called my parents for the first time in months, and I told them everything that had happened. And they said that they were gonna help me out. They said that they were gonna drive to Arkansas and come and get me, and that everything was gonna be okay. So I started to pack up my stuff. The next morning, they called me and they said, hey, we can't come get you unless you give us $700. And I said, excuse me, what for? They said, well, for gas money, and, we also need to get our car checked up to make sure that it's good to drive since we're taking such a large road trip from Tallahassee to Arkansas. And I said, dude, I just quit my job. I don't have $700 on me to give you. And my dad said, well, if you can't pay us to come and get you, then we're not going to come and get you. And I literally didn't have the money on my bank account, so I had no choice but to not pay them. So my parents didn't come and get me. And I was so mad at them because, your son's in danger over here by his own family member. You said you were going to come and get me. You taught me my whole life that you need to keep your word no matter what. And then the next morning you say, oh, hey, like, we're not going to come and get you because we don't feel like it. Unless you got $700, though, because that $700 is worth a lot more than our son's life. I threw out all of my belongings because I didn't have a car, so I couldn't take it all with me. So I threw them all out. There was no Uber. There was no Lyft. I called a taxi from Tennessee, and I paid her $200 to pick me up from Arkansas and take me to a bus station in Tennessee. I then got on a bus that took me back to Jacksonville, where I stayed for a couple of nights, and then from Jacksonville I went back to South Florida. I stayed with my grandmother for a few months. And finding a job in a big city is not easy to do because you're competing with everyone. People in Fort Lauderdale are very rude. And after a few months, I realized that it wasn't going to work out. And I was still focused on moving into the apartment that I'm in now. Even though it seemed like something impossible at the time. With help from my grandmother, I got a sublease at Urban Enclave, moved back to Tallahassee. This was probably about May of this year. I got 2 jobs, one of which I'm still at right now, and I just started working my ass off to get my shit together. And before I wrap up the story, let me give you some more examples of how my father doesn't give a shit about me. At the very start of this podcast season, I mentioned a kid named Sidhu who tracked me down and fought me at my house. That happened when I was 18 years old. I met him at recess. Him and I used to be in the same friend group. And I said something that pissed him off. And instead of being an adult about it, he tracked down my address, showed up to my house with 5 other dudes, and he assaulted me. And when I woke up the next morning with a black eye and told my father what happened, my father snapped at me. He blamed it on me for, causing problems with someone else, for some bully to show up at our doorstep and beat me up. And he didn't, not even once did he ask if I was okay after that fight. And I tried to explain to him, I said, how the hell is it my fault that a psychopath, and in case you guys haven't listened to the episode, essentially my text woke him up and he snapped at me and I called him out for being disrespectful. And then, long story short, he tracked down my address and beat me up. That's the actions of a goddamn psychopath. Normal people don't do that. And instead of my father, accepting the fact that there are crazy people in the world, and that, maybe it wasn't my fault, or maybe it wasn't entirely my fault that someone did what they did, he instead blamed me for all of it and was mad because someone had our address now. Another time, I got hit by a car. I was biking down Appalachia Parkway. An obnoxious driver almost hit me with his car. And I got mad about it and I flicked him off. Next thing I know, the guy follows me into my neighborhood and hits me full speed with his car and then just sped off. By the time the cops got here, they were gone. My bike was smashed. My ankle was bruised. I could barely walk. And the cops said, did you happen to catch the license plate? And I said, no, I didn't. He drove off too fast. And the cops said, well, I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do. Now, I view that as an attempted murder, because it's a miracle that I only walked away with a bruised ankle and not worse. The next morning, I called out at work. I said, hey, I can't come into work today because I just got hit by a car. I twisted my ankle. I can barely walk. And as soon as I hung up the phone, my father said to me, he said, if you're calling off of work, how are you going to pay me rent at the end of the month? And I said to him, I almost died yesterday, and the thing you're most concerned about right now is your goddamn rent money. And he said to me, you know, I know I might be being an asshole, but I'm just teaching you this for the future, because in the real world, when you get your own apartment or home, the landlord doesn't give a fuck if you got hit by a car. He wants his rent money when it's due. Now, here's a key detail. I had already paid my rent for that month, and I didn't owe him rent for a whole nother month, so there was absolutely no reason for him to be concerned about his rent being late. And this wasn't the only time that my parents were complete assholes to me, and then they used the excuse of, well, someone else might do it to you in the future, so we're teaching you how to act if someone's ever rude to you. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're my parents. You're supposed to teach me with your words how to act if someone's rude to you, not you yourselves be the assholes and then use excuses like, oh, well, that's how the real world is, so that's how we're gonna be too. Back to Urban Enclave, I lived there for about 2-3 months till my sublease was up, and then moved into the apartment that I'm in now. Now, one of the hardships I experienced while in the moving process was finding a hotel for 2 weeks, because I moved out of Urban on the 1st of August. My apartment wasn't ready until the 15th, and even though I had started looking for a hotel in advance, I couldn't find anything within a reasonable price, because August 1st through August 15th is when all the students come back. All the freshmen get here, all the parents come into town to help their freshmen move into their dorms or their apartments. So Tallahassee gets really busy that time of year. I asked my mother if she could help me look for a hotel, because, you know, I was working 2 jobs, so I barely had any time to myself. And she refused to help me. And she said to me, I don't know what you want me to do. You need to learn how to be on your own. This is the real world now. My grandmother stepped up, and she helped me find a hotel and also paid for the hotel in full, which took a huge relief off my shoulders. But you know what my dad said to me when I told him? I said, like, hey, it's getting closer and closer to the day I have to move out, and I'm worried that I'm not going to have a place to stay. He said to me, well, then maybe you should go homeless. And I said, excuse me? And he said, maybe you should go homeless, because then it'll teach you a lesson. It'll teach you just how difficult the world can be. And I said, you do realize that going homeless is not like you live on the street for a couple weeks and then one day you wake up and decide to buy a house, right? Like, if I go homeless, I'm not going to move into the apartment I'm in right now. I'm probably going to lose my job because, you know, I doubt they want someone working there who smells like he hasn't showered in 3 days. And he said, that's not my problem. He's like, I don't know what to tell you. And I said, well, what happened to, I'm always here for you, son. I'm always here no matter what you need. I'm always here to help you out. And if it hadn't been for his mother, my grandmother, I probably would be on the streets right now. And it's just crazy to me how my own grandmother gives more of a shit about her grandson than my own parents do. And my father hates that she cares about me. He calls it spoiling. And yes, I agree that spoiling your kids is a bad thing, but not in the way that my father looks at it. And additionally, I also asked them for help to move into my apartment that I'm in right now. And they refused to do that because they said I needed to learn how to do things on my own. The day I checked out of that hotel and moved into my apartment, I called a friend of mine and asked if he could help me move in. And he said, yeah, of course. Like, you know, I'm happy to help you out. I called my father on the phone and I lashed out at him. You didn't care about me when I was in Arkansas with my crazy cousin. You didn't care about me when Sidhu assaulted me at my own house. You didn't care when I got hit by a car and could have been dead. I said to him, you might say that you care, but your actions have shown me that you wouldn't care if I dropped dead tomorrow. And he says to me, well, that's not who I am anymore, you know. That's who I was in the past, but, you know, people change. And I said to him, you've had 20 fucking years to fix your shit. Since 20 years since his irresponsibility killed my birth mother. And he's still a fucking wreck. He's a fucking joke to society. And I had contemplated this moment for years. But that day when I was on the phone with him, I said to my dad, I said, I never wanted to do this. But from this day forward, I am no longer your son. I'm cutting you off. I hung up the phone and I blocked his number. And I blocked my mom's number. And I never spoke to him again. I went off on my own. To this day, I'm still encountering problems daily and trying to figure shit out. I've cut off a majority of my family. I've cut off my cousin. I've cut off both my parents. I cut off my aunt because she loves to criticize me. She started texting me every day that, like, hey, you need to better your life. You need to wake up. You need to get your shit together. There's these kids in Sweden who speak 15 different languages. What the fuck are you doing with your life? And one day I just woke up and blocked her. I said, you know what? I'm dealing with enough. I don't need this bullshit. Fuck you. I blocked her. And I've had to deal with my family members telling me that I should, get in contact with my parents and my cousin because they're family. And I keep telling them I don't give a shit if we share the same blood cells. I'm like, I will not keep those kind of people in my life. And I think that's also built my character. If you know me, then you know that I'm very quick to cut people off. And they tell me, they're like, well, your parents did a lot for you and they never wanted you to suffer. I'm like, well, that's interesting because it kind of feels like my parents were trying to make me go homeless, when we moved to Tallahassee. And they told me that, like, hey, you either live with us or we're gonna kick you out when you turn 18 and you're gonna go homeless. When the hurricane hit and they said you need to get out within a week and we don't care where you go. When I couldn't find a hotel and my father literally told me, go homeless, it'll teach you a good lesson. And I've been telling my family, it's like, over half the problems that I'm going through right now is because of their actions this year and last year and the year before that. And they don't give a shit that they caused these problems for me, I'd probably be much better off now had they not taken all my money as a kid and even as an adult. Maybe if they were more honest with me and less protective, I would have actually listened when they told me it was a bad idea to go with my cousin to Arkansas. And maybe they wouldn't have had to make up that lie that his father was an abusive person. And my parents love to criticize other parents anytime they see a kid crying in the store. It's the parents' fault because they don't raise their kids correctly. Anytime a spoiled young adult is mad at his grandmother because he won't give him $200 for his new PS5, it's the parents' fault. They spoiled him when he was younger. They didn't raise him properly. But then when it comes to me, suddenly it's everyone else's fault. Oh, it's because of all the cartoons he watched as a kid. It's because his grandmother spoiled him, even though we only let his grandmother watch him 2 times a month. It's everybody else's fault. It's his friend's fault. It's the movie's fault. It's Tallahassee's fault. It's these clubs he's going to. That's why that's the way he is today. They blame everyone else but themselves. Anyway, I could keep going about this for hours because I have a lot to say and I have a lot of built-up anger towards my parents and towards other people as well. But that's not why I made this episode. I made this episode to kind of bring attention to their actions. I've also hinted in previous episodes that I have some family issues. I guess what I'm trying to say is don't let people take advantage of you just because they're your family, no matter how close they are to you. So, I guess hopefully my story will somehow teach that to other people. I guess it's sort of the moral of the story. And this is also a peaceful way to strike back at my parents because I know they listen to this podcast. Because right before I cut my dad off, him and I got into an argument about this podcast. he apparently listened to every episode, and I didn't know this, but he was criticizing it, every single aspect of it. And I just thought to myself, it's so funny that after all the haters, after all the girls that have come after me for calling out their friends and all the gossip, out of everyone, my own dad has been my biggest hater and the least supportive person. Additionally, a lot of my views on politics and women and other things, a lot of that came from him too. Because he's the one who fucking raised me. So he's essentially criticizing himself. Anyway, that's my backstory. This is the Tallanasty podcast.
Rolling right close to pass on the other. It's caught! It's caught! It's caught! Touchdown official! Calvin Benjamin! Knowles retake the lead with 13 seconds remaining. Knowles retake the lead with 13 seconds.